Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and this is a channel for especially newer or returning players, or players just looking for a community, but players that play, especially really any of the Final Fantasy Brave Exvius. Like, I don't currently play ffbe anymore, but it does have a place in my heart. My account is still active, so, you know, that would be interesting as well if, I don't know, anybody wants to pull me back into that world. But that wasn't where I started with gachas. I went through a couple of different gachas. Like, there was a Dragon Ball Z gacha that was kind of interesting for a little while, and then it got really bland, and I don't know. Couldn't really commit to that. There was like some Marvel stuffs. There was the Alchemist Code, which actually felt pretty good. I liked the way that the combat worked, but I didn't really have much of a connection to the characters. They felt really random. I wasn't really getting into the story quite because, I don't know, the metagame was just, I don't know, I felt like a fish out of water. And it was also a bit of a culture shock. I think some of those more Americanized gachas were a little bit easier for me to conceptualize, or at least fool myself into thinking that I'd conceptualized, whereas the Alchemist Code was kind of mysterious and elusive to me. And ultimately this brought me into ffbe, actually by way of Final Fantasy Record Keeper. Another gacha, which I actually thought was really cool because some of the equipment would actually show up on your items, show up on your characters from what I remember, which gave you an element of customization, which we do currently have with weapons. You can skin any weapon to a unit as long as they can equip it in wotv, which is pretty cool to me. But the reason that I like the ffbe games ultimately comes down to my experience coming back to ffbe after playing it for maybe 2 years and stopping for a year. And the thing that I noticed, they were just about to move into the Neovisions meta, which is equivalent to like the 140 reincarnation meta for wotv. And as they moved into that, and even before that, there were a lot of awakenings to the current, like the 120 era that were happening. And there were a lot of older units that I had just copies of, stacks of, that were easy to awaken because I had so many of them and I've been playing for so long, and I just built up copies of these units that had been released a while ago. And I was able to build them up, and yeah, sure, they weren't like as strictly as good as the new banner unit, but they were worth getting more often than not, and they were kind of a new level of power in some ways. Like, they kind of caught up in a good way, and it allowed you, if you were to commit to the game for a longer period of time, to really put yourself in a good place to be able to free to play long term. I started out with a bit of a keeping up with the Joneses mentality. I think a lot of players do when they get into these kinds of things, and that encouraged me to spend a bit of money on the front end. And then I realized, actually, once I learned how to play this game effectively as a free-to-play player, how to kind of min-max a lot of the rewards, especially in the free premium currency, I realized I didn't really have to spend that much money, and after a while there wasn't as much catching up to do. I was kind of on the curve, or at least a little bit below it, so no pressure. And man, I really enjoyed that. Like, it felt like the game was continuously doing a good job of respecting me for being a long-term player, someone who had been playing this pretty consistently for a few years. And I see the same thing in wotv really consistently. Like, I think that especially for lower cost units, the way that the reincarnation system works seems to really benefit them, at least for now. Eventually once they've kind of given us more and more ways to get the scrolls to perform more and more reincarnations on UR units, then a lot of the luster is going to fade on a lot of these lower cost ones. But I think that a lot of the upgrades really help bring them into parity. And one thing that this game has strictly over ffbe in terms of keeping units kind of on an even keel to where, at least in offensive PvP formats and in PvE, almost anything can be viable in the right situation. And, you know, better teams have more situations that they're viable in, naturally, but anything can work. If you like a thing, you can make it work. And, you know, I just like that in a game. I think that that's really cool because it inspires creativity. It inspires you not to just follow the meta and what the top players are saying is the very best. It inspires you to play around with the rules and to challenge what really is best. And when you do that, every once in a while, you discover a way to upset the balance and tip the order, and that's really cool. And it's just, there's a lot of nuance to the game. There's about 200 characters, and they've all been, again, they're getting into a place where they're rapidly rebalancing them to where they're kind of on par with each other. And the thing that really helps out a lot is that there's kind of a job system, and jobs get upgrades over time. So older jobs get their upgrades first, and this, in addition to the other forms of upgrades that units get, to give them things more specific to them, to bring them more on par with modern units. The job upgrades are a huge benefit kind of across the board that actually I think really put in more work in terms of keeping the game and the 200 units that exist within it well balanced with each other, even though they can do some really specific and diverse things. And I think that that's really challenging from a game design perspective, and I think they do a good job of it. And, you know, it's not always a perfect experience. There are particularly some issues with I don't really want to call it AI, because it's really just like conditional programming. The way some of that programming works out, and some of that I actually do admire. I don't think the AI is bad as people say it is. I think that there's generally some situations in this game that are really gray, and, you know, it's hard to conditionally program that and keep everybody happy. The thing that you think is bad, other players might see as good, and the thing that you wish it did, other players might see as bad. You know, there's a lot of gray area in this game. Anyways, I think they do a good job of that as well, but there are some ways that could be improved too. But overall, this sense of kind of balance and fairness, I mean, yes, the newest units are always going to be the tippy top very best, and especially when you get to the very top of the game, sure. If you want to commit that hard to this, okay, maybe you do have to think about it that way. But for the rest of us who are having fun playing this game and maybe not spending a whole lot of money on it, fucking the world's your oyster. You know, just stick around, build stuff up, give it time. You know, those 2 shards a day from hard quests and 2 shards a day from the barracks, they really add up over time, you know? So I guess if you just think about it more from that perspective, that this is more of a marathon than a thing where you're going to keep up with the Joneses in the next week, then I think you're probably going to have a more healthy, probably monetary and maybe emotional relationship with this game. So those are my thoughts, like, for why new players are maybe like thinking about several different gachas, which one deserves my time. Why should that answer be War of the Visions? Well, that's my answer. It's been a while since I've played other gachas, because this one has just historically rubbed me the right way, but I had tried a variety of things before this in a kind of similar space, and so I know this space relatively well. I may not be super current on what's modern, but I'm not unfamiliar either. So, you know, I think you can take my word for it. This is a game worth committing a little bit of time to. At least, I think so. And if you're willing to commit a little extra time to understanding it, because it can be a pretty nuanced game as well, which, you know, that makes it more satisfying to me, personally. If you're willing to commit that extra time, subscribe to this channel, like this video, and I'll see you in the next one.